other words, we're too powerful as a country. We're too wealthy. We have this great industrial might, even back when Lincoln was talking about this. Economically, we're very strong. With regard to national defense, we're very strong. We've been challenged by a number of amazing challenges over the years, including more recently the war on terror. We've also been challenged by ISIS. We've been challenged by the Vietnam War and Korea and World War II and World War I, and you can keep going back, but we have overcome those. And what Lincoln is talking about, and what the book talks about, is that if we forget what it's to be an American, then we can lose our country without a shot. And I think that's what we're seeing today, is that a number of people don't understand what it means to be an American. They have, and this is a generational problem. It didn't just happen overnight. It's happened because of a number of circumstances that have surrounded us for decades. But we have forgotten what unites us as Americans, which is embedded in the Declaration of Independence, articulated in the Declaration of Independence, and then embodied and embedded in the Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to establish new government, laying its foundation such principles and organizing its power such forms of them so seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Those words from the Declaration of Independence were revolutionary in 1776, and they remain revolutionary today. And despite all the controversy about what's happened in America in the last few months, the last few years, we remain a beacon of hope, a torch of liberty for billions of people across the world. Most people in the world live in countries that they wish their country was more like ours. Some people are so frustrated with their country, they'd rather just leave and come live here. And some people hate us so much they're willing to blow themselves up just to hurt our innocent civilians. But whether they love us or hate us, they're motivated by those founding first principles articulated in the Declaration of Independence and embedded in the Constitution. The rule of law, unalienable rights, equality, the social compact, limited government, and the right to alter or abolish an oppressive government. That's what makes America America. It's not, Lady Gaga. It's not twerking. It's not, the social media stuff. It's those founding first principles. That's what unites us and what defines us. And that's all at risk. And it's at risk for a number of reasons. But the first part of the book addresses how there are studies upon studies that reveal that our general citizens and our college students and our public school students don't understand the Constitution and don't understand the Declaration of Independence and American history. And I won't bore you with all the statistics. You can just rest assured, and I'll quote one person who is in charge of a project in which they study. It's a national study. It's called the NAEP, National Assessment of Education Progress. And she said that Americans' understanding of history is abysmal. Those were her words. And the book was written a while ago, but the studies have gotten worse. We have not gone better. We've gotten worse. I'll give you one example. Separation of powers. Not a difficult concept. Basic to American history and civics. In the Constitution, there's 3 branches. There's a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. When I wrote the book, just barely more than half of the people could identify those 3 branches. Now, less than half of the people can identify those 3 branches. And how we think that we as a society can preserve our freedoms and liberties, we don't even understand what the 3 branches of government are, is bewildering. So we have a real struggle here. So the first part of the book documents the studies, and you could just update them with other statistics, but they're all kind of the same. Another one that I like to use, it's a little dated now, is the First Amendment. There's several different freedoms in the First Amendment. There's the disestablishment of the church. There's the free exercise clause of religion, There's freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom to assemble, and freedom to petition the government. So, I say there's 6. Some people say there's 5. They put the religious clauses together. Most people can identify 1, but generally not that many. It's very sad. But they can definitely list the 5 main characters of The Simpsons, right? So you can see that the culture that we have is supporting, in our education system, in essence, is supporting entertainment, gratuitous, kind of instantaneous satisfaction and gratification, and not real deliberative understanding of our foundations as a free people. And as Lincoln said, our gravest threat is from ourselves, and the book documents quotes several different founding fathers and other major American figures that say if we don't understand our history and our principles, we're at grave risk of losing it, right? Because we don't pass on through birth or genes or through the bloodstream our understanding of our Constitution and our history. Quite the opposite. We have to learn it, and we have to teach it. And there has been, over the last 100 years, really, a slow but steady erosion of our understanding of what makes America free. So we are in real hurt there. And then, worse, and there's always been challenges. I'm not trying to exaggerate. There have always been communists and anarchists and Nazis and people like that really don't believe in our founding first principles. They don't believe in equality. They don't believe in the rule of law. They don't believe in limited government. But they were on the fringes. And now what's happened is that there is a great cultural counter-revolution, so to speak, that is trying to replace our foundational understanding of America as being a good country with serious flaws that require improvement to an evil country that can never be fixed and rectified. And I'll give one example, which is very prominent, which most people might not be aware of, is the 1619 Project. And that is a project created by the New York Times. It has the explicit goal of redefining the birth of America from 1776 to 1619, because 1619 was when the first African-American slaves came over on a slave ship in Jamestown. And they say that is when we were founded, and we have always been racist, and we will never be good, and everything that we do is wrong, or pretty close to it, and that we have this guilt that we can never erase. And the woman that is behind it has openly declared that she's in favor of reparations, and this is the whole point of this is to get reparations. Put aside whether that reparations are appropriate or not, when you have, and 4,500 schools have adopted this curriculum because New York Times makes it free, okay? So there's a movement to attack what the Declaration of Independence posits, that we hold these truths to be self-evident. They don't even try to say that all men are created equal. They don't even try to say that there's truths, that truths are self-evident, or that equality, that all people are created equal. They just say America is inherently racist. Everything it does is to support this oppression of people, and it's very corrosive to our spirit and to our freedoms and liberties. Of course, when I wrote the book, 1619 Project wasn't there, so that part isn't in the book, so I've given a little extraneous information. But there are open attacks on America's founding beliefs, and the academy, especially the ivory tower of elite universities, are really leading the charge to attack what we should believe is our foundational beliefs. So what are our foundational beliefs? As I said before, the rule of law, unalienable rights, limited government, the social compact, equality, and the right to alter or abolish an oppressive government. So the first chapter is about the studies that I mentioned. The second chapter is about what those founding first principles are. So the first one is the rule of law, and that basically means that everyone needs to follow the law, that the law will govern our society, not the personal viewpoints of particular individuals that are in power, and that everyone that's in the society, be it a janitor or the CEO, a judge or a prisoner, the president, or a Marine captain, whatever it is, everybody has to follow the law, and everyone has to follow the same law. And so this is quite revolutionary. Because up until 1776, the idea was that the people that were in power really were exempt from the law. They may pass laws and kind of impose it on the lower people in society, but not in connection with themselves. So it was a very oppressive system. And, there was a couple shining bright lights of exceptions, but basically in the whole course of human history, the law was intended to be a way of oppressing most of the people in the society, the great mass of people. And the rulers were exempt from the law. So having the rule of law apply to everyone is fundamentally important to preserving our liberties. Because if the people and the government don't have to follow the law, then you're going to be oppressed. And if the people that are the governed or the people, we're the sovereigns, if we don't follow the law, then you have chaos and anarchy, and that's terrible. The second is the first principle is unalienable rights. Unalienable rights means that your rights come from the Creator. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So the rights come from God, nature, nature's law, whatever you want to call it. They're embedded in you, and they can't be taken away. It's called unalienable. Alienability is an old-fashioned term. It's a legal term. Alienability means you could sell it, you could transfer it. If it's unalienable, and some people use inalienable, that means you can't trade it away. It can't be taken from you. So the whole idea of unalienable rights is that the rights are born in you and they stay with you forever. If you might forfeit your rights if you commit crimes, things like that. They can put you in prison. That's not the idea. The idea is that freedom of speech, free exercise of religion, the right to assemble, the right to publish your ideas, all those things are unalienable rights born in you, not given to you by the government. And this is something that I think has been fundamentally lost for much of our society, is they believe they've gotten used to going to the government and asking for permission to do things. They say, I'll do anything I can as long as the government says it's okay. That flips the whole idea of unalienable rights upside down. Unless there's a just law that for some reason restricts what you're doing, you have the right to act the way you want. The government serves you. You don't serve the government. The third is equality. And this is an idea, and this is what I think the 1619 Project is working very hard to erode, because they want to create divisions among our society based on immutable characteristics. And that's the opposite of what the Declaration of Independence says. The Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That means that we're all equal under the law. This works very well it dovetails with the idea of the rule of law, and that we're all equal because we're all created by the Creator. We're all sovereign. We all each have the ability to control our own lives and should treat each other equally and be treated by the government equally. That's different than equality of outcome, which is the communist way, which is that everybody should have the same amount of property, and that we're going to have a government impose that across everybody. We're talking about opportunity and to be treated equally. And that no matter what your race is, no matter what your religion is, no matter what your ethnic background is, no matter how much money you have, you are equal to everyone else. That's the fundamental basis. No question that we lived that in the breach, that we were hypocritical when we adopted the Declaration of Independence, and there were large segments of society that held slaves. There were large segments of society that discriminated based on men, for example, not owning land, couldn't vote. Women had no political rights and very few economic rights. No question. But the ideal of equality is what drove the changes in society that we benefit from today. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But if you reject the idea of equality and say, no, we're going to treat people differently because of the color of their skin, because of their class, or because of their creed, or whatever it is, that's just like all the rest of human history. You go to India, they had a caste system. 10,000 different people, or 10,000 different castes, divided the people up. And, if you're a caste 150, you would never talk to somebody in class 5,000. And if you were an untouchable, which is like 20% of the population, you had no rights. Why? Because you were born that way. It was inherently unequal. It was defined by who you were just by birth, and we rejected that. And there are, nobility and royalty, all that stuff. We threw that out the window. We said we're not going to do that. But people today that want to divide people up by their skin color or other things, it's corrosive and it's terrible and it undermines our founding first principle in connection with equality. Social compact is the idea that we have these natural rights that come from God. They're unalienable. And so we have the right to defend ourselves. Somebody breaks into your house, beats up your wife, and then steals your TV and runs down the street. If there was no government, you'd have the right to defend yourself. And then if for some reason you couldn't and they ran away, you would have the right basically to exact what we would call vigilante justice. You could chase them down, beat them up, get the TV back, maybe give them some extra punishment while you're at it. And what does that lead to if you don't have a government? A short, nasty, and brutish life. That's what Thomas Hobbes, an English philosopher, said. And John Locke, another English philosopher, and Thomas Hobbes developed this idea of a social compact that in a state of nature, we would just be a war of all against all. So we give up some of our rights so that we can have a government to protect the rest of our rights. So if somebody breaks into your house, beats up your wife, now you have a police force, you have a fire department, you have a court system that's designed to protect, first off, to deter that kind of behavior. So hopefully it never happens. But if it does, that justice will be done and you don't have to risk yourself because, you go chase them down and you beat them up. They might shoot you back or their relatives might burn your house down next, right? It's just an never-ending cycle. We don't want to live that way. So we have a social compact. There are two divisions within the social compact, logical consequence-wise. One is that if you consent to the government, which is what you're doing, to create a government to protect your rights, then the government can do no harm. You've consented to it. It does whatever. If it does something, you really don't have a reason to complain because you consented to the government having power and authority. And that's what Thomas Hobbes believed. And he said that because he was trying to justify the idea of an English king having basically absolute power. And so he said, we've consented to a king. We need a king to keep us secure, and so the king can do no wrong. John Locke said, no, we've consented to a government to protect our inalienable rights, so that's the full extent of the just power and authority of the government. So if it goes beyond just trying to protect unalienable rights and some other kind of basic things that people on themselves can't organize to do, then the government is unjust. And this is what we agreed to in the Declaration of Independence. We said a just government is designed to protect our inalienable rights. That's the whole purpose for it. And it only has authority because we give it authority. And so that means that instead of just letting the king be an absolute ruler, that we elect people to represent us. We've consented to that. For example, taxation without representation. One of many motivating factors for the American Revolution, and that was because there was nobody in the colonies that was consenting to the taxes that were being imposed. We don't have a tax revolution in America today because we, for good or ill, elect the people that impose the taxes on us. And if we don't like that, we can sweep them out in the next election. We can change the Constitution to ban those kinds of taxes. There's a lot of things that we can do. So the social compact is this idea that the people and the government are serve each other in the sense, I should not say that. The government doesn't serve, the people never serve the government, but there's a cooperation in which the government is supposed to serve the people through the consent of their elected legislators. The people give up some of their authority to the government so that we can have a stable society and live by the rule of law. It comes back to the rule of law once those rules are in place. The limited government, so that's the fifth idea is limited government, that it's limited through the social compact. And we've developed that in the Constitution, which I'll explain in just a minute. And then the last first principle is the fact that we had a Declaration of Independence, right? We rebelled against a government to protect our inalienable rights. Now, this is not to be taken lightly. There's a long train of abuse and usurpations that happened. There were dozens of complaints in the Declaration of Independence, grievances that were not just taxation without representation. There was a whole slew of them. And it went on for years and years and years. And they struck at the heart of the inalienable rights of the colonists. And so that justified the revolution. But we don't need to do that now, hopefully in the future, because we have elections, we can amend laws, we can amend constitutions. So we've built into our system a bloodless idea of reforming or even having a bloodless revolution. When we had the election of 1800, Thomas Jefferson called that the Revolution of 1800 because he defeated the party in power. They switched administrations. The policies just changed basically overnight. And that was the first time in history that really ever happened. There was a bloodless revolution through the mechanisms of the Constitution. So those are the first principles. And then the book talks about the revolution. It goes through why we declared revolution. And it's all about freedom and liberty. I know there's a narrative out there. It's about economics, or it's in 1619 project says to protect slavery, which is ridiculous. The founding fathers are very split on slavery. There were plenty of Northerners who hated the institution, wanted to abolish it, and they even pointed out that there was hypocrisy about declaring independence to protect liberty there and then have slaves at home. But if you read all of the chapter about the revolution, it's very clear that the revolution was motivated by protecting our founding first principles and unalienable rights. The next chapter is about the fact that after we won the revolution, we kind of went adrift. We had a very weak central government under the Articles of Association, Confederation. And the federal government was so weak that the states started to violate the unalienable rights of their own people. And there were trade wars between the states. It was a real mess. And so James Madison and Alexander Hamilton kind of got together and conspired to create a constitutional convention. It took a few years, but they got it together. And then we had the Constitutional Convention. And the next chapter is about the Constitution, and it goes through many parts of the Constitution explaining how the Constitution embodies the first principles. So I'll do this at a very high level. For example, we have a Constitution. It's written. Okay, that is the rule of law. It literally is the rule of law, and it created a social compact. It defined what the social compact was. It protected unalienable rights. It doesn't use that terminology, but we have protected through the Bill of Rights, again, the free exercise of religion, free speech, freedom of press, the right to bear arms, the right not to have troops quarter us, the right not to have unreasonable searches and seizures. You go through the whole list. There are the right not to have something you did one day become criminalized retroactively, the ex post facto laws. There's a whole set of protections of unalienable rights. Also, the whole scheme of the government is to be slow and methodical. It's not supposed to be changing things overnight, which also helps protect unalienable rights. You have to have all these different entities, the Congress, both branches, the president, and the Supreme Court all agree that what they're doing is constitutional. So that is a kind of a structural barrier to protecting inalienable rights. We have equality, and we've, again, at the beginning, we lived that in breach. But there's a future chapter, which I'll get to about this in just a second. But the idea was accepted that everyone was created equal. The question was who fell in the bucket of equality. There's an old understanding from South Africa. It was called a Herrenvolk democracy, which basically means if you're of a particular gender and or race, then everybody's treated equal. So clearly we fell very short there, but it was embodied in the Constitution. And later on, we made amendments to the Constitution to apply it to everyone. We also had limited government, and limited government worked in many different ways. One is that there's checks and balances within the different branches. So we have each one. First off, there's a separation of powers. So the legislature is supposed to pass the law, the president's supposed to execute it, and the Supreme Court and the federal courts are supposed to resolve judicial disputes and define what the law is if there is a dispute. But they also check each other. So within, and sometimes they're checked within themselves. For example, in Congress, there's two branches, not just one. If you saw what happened in revolutionary France, there was one assembly. They went crazy. There was no check. There was no president. There was not a second chamber of the legislature. So they just started, eventually they just started chopping people's heads off, and eventually chopped their own heads off because there was really no check. But because we've split the Senate and the House, and it slows down the process, but it also ensures limited government. We have the president can veto, the legislature can override the veto, the Supreme Court can strike down a law that violates the Constitution. The legislature, Congress, can strip the Supreme Court of jurisdiction. So there's a lot of checks and balances there that people aren't aware of. And the most important one in my mind, which has really gotten short shrift recently, is federalism, which is that we divide, not only do we divide the power of the government between three branches, but we divide it between two different kinds of government. So we have the federal government and we have the state governments. And unless it's explicitly provided for that the federal government gets this power, it stays with the states. That's also revolutionary. That's called enumerated powers. Normally, national governments have unlimited authority. That's not the case in America. It's specifically limited to what's expressed, and then everything else stays with the states. And that's not just so that we have laboratories of democracy, which a lot of people like to use that term. It's a protection of liberty. The federal government can't get so big as to quash your rights if it can't act in that area. And it also gives you this great escape hatch. If you're in California and you're a conservative Republican and you don't like all the stuff that they're doing in California, you can flee to Texas. And there's a lot of people doing that. Or if you're in Texas and you like the San Francisco lifestyle, you can go to San Francisco. So that protects liberty. You don't have a one-size-fits-all across the whole country. If you did that, the power to do good is the power to do evil. And often that happens. And you look at places like Nazi Germany or other totalitarian states where everything came from the central authority. They made a mistake. It affected everybody in the country. Federalism is designed to stop that, and also is designed to have tension between the states and the federal government. So they're always checking each other. They really are supposed to be kind of friendly combatants, for the lack of a better term. We've really eroded that recently. Mostly the states, not always, but most of the states just kind of, they take a little bit of money for the federal government to get the policies the federal government wants to do. I think that's an erosion of federalism. We also have a significant problem with expansive readings of the Constitution by the United States Supreme Court, which has made the federal government much more power over our lives than originally was intended. And then revolution, again, we have an amendment process. We have elections that are put within our system, and therefore you can vote the bums out. The next chapter is about how those founding first principles, but in particular the one about equality, motivated the abolitionist movement and emancipation to free the slaves. And this is something that has really been forgotten by a number of people because they don't remember that the people that were arguing for expanding the franchise and abolishing slavery, they didn't condemn the Declaration of Independence. They didn't say, we were evil. They said this was awesome, but you're hypocrites, and you need to fulfill the promise of the Declaration of Independence. And that argument worked. It took a long time, and we had a civil war. I think people forget 600,000 people died so the slaves could be freed. Terrible, terrible toil on the country. Then we had Jim Crow. It was terrible. Then we reverted back, and then there was a great civil rights movement, really kind of beginning of the 40s and moving into through the 60s and beyond. And again, it was you read Martin Luther King Jr. What is he reading? What is he citing as authority? The Declaration of Independence. And likewise with women, they looked at the Declaration of Independence and said it should say, instead of saying all men are created equal, it should say all men and women. And they basically took all the arguments that were made for abolitionism, for African American slaves and enslaved people, and they said apply it to women. The same arguments apply. And if you think about it, if you are a slave or you're a woman without the right to vote, etc., the rule of law does not apply to you the way it applies to everybody else. You don't have your unalienable rights. You're being treated unequally. You're not part of the social compact. limited government has no meaning for you. And so they went with that last one. We're going to change the system and call upon and evoke those other founding first principles. And fortunately, that has happened. And I'm not pretending that there aren't problems. Obviously, there are problems with racism and gender discrimination and all that. But we have made tremendous progress. And we need to remember that we've made tremendous progress and then build on that progress so that we can continue. And in fact, this might surprise some of you, but President Biden, in his speech at the inauguration, said, it's a never-ending, and I forget the exact phrase, but it's a never-ending challenge to try to live up to the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, and that we will never be done, is what he said. I hope that someday we'll be done, but I think he's right that the course of our country has shown that every year it's been a new challenge, and we've also kind of rethought about what it means. What does equality really mean? What who should enjoy the blessings of unalienable rights and be part of the social compact and enjoy the rule of law. And so that's really what's motivated us. The last chapter of the book is about solutions. So I've probably given you a pretty depressing speech so far, but I don't think we can lose hope. There's a number of solutions. Some of it's like what we're doing now, educating people. We need to change the K-12 school system to teach honest American history and civics, and then not do it kind of in the haphazard way that we do it now, but to make it a core part of our K-12 system so that every year the kids are learning about American history and our Constitution so that by the time they graduate from high school, it's not like the last thing that they learn in civics, which is what kind of happens now with many schools. That they're senioritis. A lot of kids have already dropped out, and then then they teach civics, which is a terrible way to teach it. It should be done throughout their whole academic career, and the importance of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, could not be emphasized enough. Colleges also have a challenge. One of the studies showed that they did a study of some of the elite Ivy League schools, and they did kind of a baseline high school American history test when they went into the school, a senior level test, and then they gave it again 4 years later, and they did worse. So they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to get stupid. I mean, this is ridiculous. Those parents should be enraged, and that is not uncommon. Those were elite institutions, and I think that is a serious problem. American history and civics is not required in most universities anymore, so of course they're not learning it. Our media is terrible. They almost spend no time in connection with these ideas, and we also have a problem with the politicians. And we really need to hold them accountable. I really liked most of President Biden's speech. I really do believe that we need to unify, and hopefully we can unify around our founding first principles. But he didn't really speak much about most of the other principles. There wasn't anything about limited government. There was very little about the social compact. The word unalienable rights, I don't think, came out of his mouth, that phrase. So, there's work to be done. And it's not just him. For generations, we've had politicians, you ask a politician, what's an unalienable right? I think 99% of them are going to stare you in the face and go, I don't know. They can't define it. And that's our fault. We need to elect people that know what the foundation of our country is. They're just going to where the lowest common denominator is to get their votes. And so we need to do something. The other major proposal that I have, which is actually not in the book, although it was kind of referred to, it was referred to, but not in the way that it is developed, is holiday reform. So we have all these great holidays that are intended to stop us in our hustle bustle of our day to renew our faith in America. Now, I happen to be an adult convert to Catholicism, and I grew up as an atheist, then I was an agnostic, and I was not a believer in any sense of the imagination. And then I had this conversion experience, of all places, in Ann Arbor law school in my third year, and I converted overnight, and I ended up going and taking religious education formation classes. And when I did that, I realized, I kind of knew it, but not really, that there was this thing called the liturgical calendar, where there's these holidays every year that we stop in the hustle bustle of our day to renew our faith, right? There's Easter, there's Christmas, there's Pentecost, there's Advent. And all the great religions had this idea of liturgical calendar. And America used to have a civic calendar. We had Washington's birthday, Lincoln's birthday, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Thanksgiving, Armistice Day. Why? To stop in the hustle bustle of our day and to renew our faith in America. In fact, John Adams wrote, when we declared independence, that the anniversary of that day would be forever remembered and celebrated with bonfires, speeches, bells, games, and illuminations in the sky from one end of the continent to the other, now and forevermore. And he was right. We still have Independence Day. But he also wrote that it should be a solemn day of devotion for the blessings of liberty. Now, I don't know about you, but the last time I had a hot dog at a 4th of July party, it was not a particularly solemn occasion. We have hollowed out, commercialized, and cheapened all of our holidays, civic holidays. So I explained this to my daughter. She was only 10 at the time. She got very upset, pounded on the table, and said, "Dad, that's wrong. We need to do something. We need to start a new celebration for America." So that's how Patriot Week started. It goes from September 11th, obviously the anniversary of the terrorist attacks, to September 17th, which is the anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. We celebrate our founding first principles from the Declaration of Independence, key documents and speeches that embody them, founding fathers and other great patriots that may become alive in America, and flags from history like the Betsy Ross flag behind me. It's grassroots, 501c3, nonpartisan, has been recognized unanimously by the U.S. Senate 2 years going. We've had other resolutions, about 15 states. We've had festivals and we've parades and debates and presentations. It's a lot of schools have been involved across, not just in Michigan, but there's been some across the country. It's a great opportunity to help renew the spirit of America. So if you're interested in that, that's patriotweek.org. And we are producing a really cool podcast, which takes, right now, I'm going through the Declaration of Independence, and basically we're doing a phrase or maybe a couple phrases per episode. And so it's a real deep dive into the Declaration. We've also done, some on current holidays and other current events that civics or history can really be informative and enlightening on what's going on. So that's called Patriot Lessons, American History and Civics. And was alluded to by Steve just a little bit earlier. I've been doing a daily, I think some of you have been watching these, so that's why you're here, a daily, very short, Save Our Republic video daily message. Goes usually 3 to 5 minutes or so. It's on the Patriot Week YouTube channel. It's on all my social media. So if you're interested in getting engaged, you've got many opportunities to do that. AmericaSurvivalGuide.com, patriotweek.org, American History, Patriot Lessons, American History and Civics, and then the Save Our Republic video. And I'm on all the social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, maybe not all, Twitter. So you can reach me in a number of different ways if you're interested in helping out, because it's totally a volunteer effort in connection with Patriot Week. And I think that if we don't work hard now at this time in history, where we're really at a crossroads about whether or not this country is going to stay together and unite behind our founding first principles, or whether or not we're going to continue to fray and maybe go to war against each other. And I don't say that lightly, but I mean, you saw what happened in the summer with the unrest. You saw what happened at the Capitol building. There's a real danger that we could go down much faster than we might have expected. Some of you will likely remember this. In 1989, I was a student at U of M Law School, and I looked outside and I saw all these kids running around. And they were all the foreigners. I was like, what are these guys doing? What's going on? The Berlin Wall had fallen, and they were celebrating something they thought they would never see. Well, I don't want to see the opposite. I want to wake up one day and look outside and say, what the heck is going on, and find out, the country has collapsed. I was really holding my breath through the inauguration. Hopefully I'm exaggerating and I'm wrong, but I really do think that our country is on the precipice here. And these next few months, next couple years are going to be really important to the future of our country. If we're going to keep dividing and using violence and disdaining all of our founding first principles, if we're going to say, nope, we're going to renew the spirit of America and move forward. We have had stronger challenges in the past. Civil War was terrible, almost destroyed us. But that was geographical mostly. I don't know. Right now, we're polarized neighbor to neighbor, which could be even much worse if you think about it. We don't want to go down that path. Thank you for your attention. I think we're going to open it up to questions. But in the interim, God bless you and God bless America.
Thank you, Judge Warren. I think I'm open where people can hear me. Can you hear me, Judge?
I can hear you.
Okay. I had a question, and then afterwards, I know Rick Troy is monitoring where he can unmute people. So after my question, if you have a chance, I believe, Rick, if people raise their hand, then Rick will be able to unmute them so they can ask follow-up questions after. What I want to ask you about is just a common sense set of facts. I know education is one thing that you talked about. Of course, that's very important. But good people, honest people, patriots can have different opinions on a wide range of topics. I have a wide range of friends across the spectrum. But if you watch, the news, the cable news, from One American News and Fox to CNBC, etc., it's not just their different opinions. Just that the facts that are accepted are just so. It's like you're in a different universe, a different world. And I don't know how we can fix that. I believe there's legislation that was undone about 30 years ago, the Fair Reporting Act, where there was more credibility, where the news agencies had to give equal time and had to be more credible. How do we fix this? Like with social media, you hear something you don't agree with, immediately you're an idiot. It's immediately fake news. We can't even begin to have a conversation if we can't even hold some facts up to be at least reasonable. Some people said some things in your courtroom that they would be disbarred. So can you just discuss that a little bit about how can we have that with the purpose of having an honest and true debate on real issues that matter?
That's a wonderful question. It's a huge challenge for us as a country. I will comment on a couple different levels. First off, it's much easier to demonize somebody if you don't realize that you have united, shared beliefs. And so when you cut out from underneath our system a universal belief in our founding first principles and the Declaration of Independence, then it's much easier to demonize the other person. So we had that election in 1800 I alluded to. Thomas Jefferson went to and that was a vicious campaign, just as bad as the Trump-Biden campaign. Terrible, terrible campaign. And Jefferson went up and he said, we need to unite behind what unites us as Americans. And a difference in opinion is not a difference in principle. We are all Federalists. We are all Republicans. And he set a tone that brought the temperature down. And then he told people what he thought a good, just government would do. And then he said, and if you're opposed to that, I welcome your opposition. I want to hear from you. First off, I might learn from you. But secondly, if you're wrong, we want to prove that we're strong enough to be able to take your criticism and be a strong country. He said, most people think democracy is the weakest form of government. I think it's the strongest. The republic is going to be the strongest form because we will show the error of people's ways and we'll be able to move on in a united fashion. So part of my real grave concern here is that since we've done such a terrible job in educating people about our founding first principles and our history, that a difference in opinion, you don't even have the question of a difference in principle. There is no principle. They're just differences in opinion. And so it's really easy to demonize that other person. With regard to, we have developed an echo chamber mentality in our country where people go, the power, I said this before, the power to do good is the power to do evil. We have this magnificent internet, which gives you this ability to go to all these different news sources and to listen to different people's opinions and engage in debate and have genuine time for reflection. And it's a wonderful opportunity. I can do my Save Our Republic on YouTube and people can watch it or turn it off or whatever. On the other hand, if all you do is watch what you already agree with, and then you kind of perpetuate yourself, then you're in this, you are in an alternative universe. And so the people do see the facts extraordinarily differently. And I think what's happened is that the media, who used to be kind of the arbiter of neutrality and what was real facts and what was speculation, most of the media has unquestionably become biased one way or another. And when they start off by when they start by saying President Trump has lied again today because they've drawn a conclusion that tells everybody, well, we think he's a liar, and then the other side says President Trump has told the truth because what the idea before was we show what Trump says, we show what his opponents say. Here's what we uncovered independently, and the viewers would have some idea of could kind of get their way to a truth. It's very difficult to do that in today's media environment. I don't think the government is the answer. To have so I work for the government, right? We have all had experience with the government. The government that is in charge of distribution of the vaccines and has been in charge of all these pork barrel projects. That's the government that you want to be in charge of your political thinking? I don't think so. I think we need censors from the government is not the right answer. So I'm very concerned about having the government tell people what to do, because I think that just makes it worse. Donald Trump, your worst fears, you're a Democrat. Donald Trump is now in charge of the federal government, and he controls what you see from the media. Or you're a Trumpite, and now Hillary Clinton is in charge of the government. She tells you what you can hear from. We don't want to go down that path. We don't want to get close to that. In the end, I know one person in particular I suspect is going to really believe with this. In the end, it comes from you. Every change has to come from your own heart. You are a sovereign individual that has a miraculous power to change society. And when enough people are responsible and accountable for their behavior and spend the time and the energy to get out of that cloud of echo chamber and to try to seek the truth will prevail. And it's only when you run to under a rock and decide I'm only going to listen to this. So our obligation for those of us that are not in the echo chamber, or at least know there are echo chambers, we need to draw people out and explain to them why we think that's true. Now, I'll tell you, my Save Our Republic thing, it's been interesting because I complimented President Biden's inaugural. And I start getting hit from people saying, why could you can't do that? I'm like, yes, I can. I mean, just because, I wear a red, white, and blue bow tie and I believe in the American founding, why can't I say something complimentary about the president? And so we need to do that. And okay, we're all busy. We don't have a lot of time. Try to get your news from more than one source. I happen to be a big podcast person, so I listen to NPR, just a short little segment, the Heritage Foundation, short little segment, a libertarian group. I listen to The Socialist. So I'm getting, and there's a couple of other sources, so I get a wide perspective. I'll tell you, every once in a while, The Socialist, the World Workers United website, they tell me things I never heard from anywhere else, and they're actually accurate. I'm like, whoa, I never thought of that, or I didn't know that fact. And then you kind of do it, and you're like, you're right. So don't just listen to Fox News or MSNBC. Try your best to sample the news from different sources. I also read the Detroit News, which I think is relatively objective. And then encourage others to do it. And if we can start, every movement has started with one person deciding they didn't like what the world is like anymore. We're going to change it. So make your contribution. You have the power to change the world.
Judge, we have a question that is coming in through chat. If I could ask it of you on behalf of whoever it was. Could you give your opinion in regards to media and big tech regarding free speech and the United States judicial's avoidance of dealing with it?
Okay, so I did do a Save Our Republic on this. We don't. So the First Amendment So when you use free speech, I think of the First Amendment. And maybe that's not what that person is referring to. But the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. We've extrapolated that to be any government. First Amendment is implicated when the government intervenes and does censorship. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Reddit, all these things, none of them are government entities. And so your First Amendment rights can't be violated when they close you down. What can be violated is your contract rights and other rights that you have with a service agreement with them, but not in connection with their your First Amendment rights. I do think. I understand the frustration, because what's really frustrating to me is you had people complaining about Facebook and saying, it's biased, and Facebook's response, other people's response, well, this is a free market. Build a competitor. And so Parlay, some people call it Parler, built one, and then they brought it down, right? So that's tremendously frustrating. I don't know if the allegations that Amazon made against Parlay were correct or not, but I think that I can understand the frustration. I'm not, but what I would suggest, if I stood on principle, I might not be on any of these social media platforms because I don't like what they've done and shutting down other people. But I want that's ceding the territory to the people that are on the platform. So I refuse to do that. I'm going to keep putting myself out there until they decide they want to close down Michael Warren, and then I'll find some other alternative if they do that. It would be quite a shame, because I think I'm pretty balanced in what my opinions are. And I don't know, is the question about monopolies in the social media, do you think? I'm not sure if I understood what that was.
I'm not going to try to interpret it.
Okay.
The answer is yes.
So if it's about monopolies, I am not a monopoly person, expert. I would say that I know in the past when they've gone after what they thought were monopolies, by the time they got done with the lawsuit, that like the company was bankrupt or there was clearly competitors. So I do think that Google and Facebook have these huge market influences, and that they should definitely be carefully watched. And I think that they are definitely getting close to doing what they weren't supposed to do, which was that under that immunity from being a publisher, from being lawsuits, they said we're a platform. And it does seem, at least on several occasions, that they've gone over the edge of that, and they have shut people down just because they don't like the speech that they're doing. Now, I can't go through line by line and what maybe there's stuff I don't know. But I think that's a real issue that Congress ought to look at. And if Facebook decides we're going to be a liberal platform and we're not going to let conservatives voice their opinions, they shouldn't be immune. Now they're a publisher. Or at least there's a strong argument to that, and maybe they should lose that immunity. But I think I'm undecided in connection with that.
Thank you, Judge. Rick, were there any other questions, or was anyone raising their hands? I don't know how much more time the judge has for us. Of course, we appreciate it. Rick, can I defer to you? Did anyone either type one in or raise their hand? Rick, can you control that? There's a gentleman who's raising his hand. Are you able to open it? And Rick, I don't know if you can hear me. There was someone who was raising his hand. No?
Yes, there we go.
Perfect. Thank you, Rick.
Hi, Judge. Hi, all.
Hi.
If I could make a statement on the 1619 project.
Sure.
I've thought a lot about it, and I think, and Judge, you mentioned how ignorant Americans are of history. And I think the people that can buy the 1619 project are people who don't really know history and don't know that in 1619, America and Europe were just moving out of antiquity when the rest of the world really wasn't moving out of antiquity. And antiquity was brutal. Somebody asked me, when we were founded in 1776, we didn't give women the right to vote. That's true. We should have. But in 1776, only 2 countries in the world gave women the right to vote. And those were property-owning women, which were obviously widows. So that's my thoughts on the 1619 Project, is that it requires historical ignorance to buy into.
Scott, I agree with you. And in some of the podcasts that we've done on the Patriot Lessons, American History and Civics podcast, we delve into this quite deeply with regard to equality. Slaveholding, like it or not, and of course it's not, was universal in 1619. There weren't any, people think, it was just America. They are so clueless about how many people in Africa were shipped over to Arab countries, to South America, down to the Caribbean islands. And, America was like a little minor of all the slave trade. So it was it was terrible, it was awful. But to say, we're condemned forever, well, then every country in the world is condemned forever. And that's what we want to have, is a world that we say we hate humanity. We hate ourselves because 400 years ago, we sucked. If that's the world that you want to live in, we're doomed. I mean, just slice your wrist and get done with it. I mean, we can't live that way. And it's the same. And the people that really got terrible, was the genocide, was the Native Americans, right? I mean, we slaughtered them. But warfare, slaughtering and eliminating ethnic groups, universal. Read the Bible. I mean, the Israelites went in. They said, "We're going to take this." And they killed everybody. So it doesn't excuse it, but it puts it in the context. And the problem with the 1619 Project is that I think they think that we are the worst there ever has been, and that's wrong. We're the best there's ever been. We're still flawed, all kinds of problems, but we're better than everybody else, and that's what they don't recognize.
Could I follow up briefly?
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think it was genocide of the natives. Studies have shown that most of them died, sadly, to diseases that they did not have immunities to, just as the bubonic plague killed 1/3 of all of Europe's. And that was caused by migrations that had happened throughout history. And it was also a series of brutal wars where both sides were very unkind to each other.
Yeah, I understand that position. I would say that, we pretty much we were going to put them in Oklahoma and get rid of the rest of them, but I understand. You're right. That's a very good point. And that happened, if you, out of the United States, if you look at Mexico and South America, when the Spanish went in, they were thriving societies of millions of people, and then they all got wiped out, not just because the conquistadors were particularly militarily powerful, which they were, but that also they had all those diseases that just wiped out that population.
Thank you, Judge. And Rick, I would defer to you if there are any other questions in the queue, or I think we might be wrapping up. Were there any other last-minute questions for the judge?
We do have one.
Okay.
Give me just a moment here. Okay. The question is whether the country is really getting closer to first principles, and that we've given the vote to women and blacks since then. And also since then we have direct election of senators, direct election of presidential electors, gradually improving race relations as represented by the election of a black president, etc.
Great question. I think that we have, through, I would say, history is not a straight line, despite what people would like to say. There's bumps and goes up and down. And we've made tremendous progress. And part of the book talks about that the first principles animated the emancipation movement and the women's suffrage movement. And we've made a tremendous amount of progress, most recently with other different kinds of sexual orientations, things like that. But now there seems to be a war over those first principles and whether or not we're going to continue to abide by them. And because there's so much ignorance out there, it's very easy not to. And so, as I said before, I think we're at a crossroads, and we can get past this. And this has been a generational issue. We can get past it and thrive and have our best days ahead of us, or we can fall off the cliff. And right now I feel like we're getting ready to fall off the cliff. And that's all the kind of the smaller indicators of education, culture, entertainment, how people talk to each other. Those are all going in the wrong direction. The bigger ones, like we haven't re-enslaved people, we haven't taken people's rights away, etc. Those are all still pretty solid, but I don't know that people appreciate how hard it was to get those, and that those great changes were motivated by the first principles.
Thank you, Judge. I think we're about to be wrapping up. I wanted to give everyone our next date is Thursday, February 25th. That's a Thursday, 7 p.m. We have former Congressman from Macomb County, David Bonier. The Bar Association, the Bar Foundation, we have people from across the political spectrum. If you would like to email me, Rick, I don't know if you want to give the bar, or I'll give my own personal email, tigersof68@AOL.com. Yes, AOL definitely dates me. Tigers like the Detroit Tigers, TIGERS as in Sam, OF as in Frank, digit 6, digit 8, at AOL.com. And I'll keep a list, and I'll make sure. I definitely want to hear your ideas. We want to have a broad range of people and ideas. Thank you very much to Judge Warren. I think I've known you for about 7 or 8 years. You always bring a lot of energy, a lot of ideas, and it certainly makes me rethink a lot of my position as well. So, Judge, unless you want to have any last-minute comments, thank you very much for your time, everybody. Thank you, Judge. And
Thank you.
We'll see you next month. Judge, did you have anything you want to say on the way out?
Don't forget patriotweek.org. Everything's there. Thanks.
And how can we buy your book?
Go. Back in the day when I could actually see people physically, I have some in my trunk and I sell them. But go to americasurvivalguide.com. That's the best place to go.
And I hear that you'll autograph the books. Is that correct?
Well, I have to do the special thing in the trunk, but I do. We'll figure it out.
Okay. Thank you very much, Judge.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Rick Troy. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Judge.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Be safe.
You too.
Take care, all.
Thank you, Judge.